The Hey Charity podcast, amplifying voices, inspiring change. Hey Charity is a podcast where we deep dive into the world of not-for-profits, interviewing visionary charity leaders who are making a real difference.
We're going to look at how good governance shouldn't be perceived negatively by charities and trustees. If done right, it should help you more effectively fulfil your charity's purposes.
Through engaging conversations, we explore the challenges charities face, the successes they celebrate, and how understanding the law can empower them to do even more good. Whether you're a charity professional, volunteer, or simply passionate about charity work, this podcast offers practical legal insights and inspiring stories to help charities thrive. Tune in for expert advice and real-world inspiration to fuel your organisation's mission.
I'm Sophie Bartup, Community Development Manager at the Hey Smile Foundation. I've proudly spent 13 years volunteering within my local community and 6 incredible years working within the voluntary and community sector, and I am a hugely passionate advocate promoting volunteering within charities.
I'm Gerry Morrison and I've been a charity lawyer for over 20 years now, and I specialise in charity law exclusively and helping charities and their trustees navigate the complex minefield of charity law and their relationship with the regulator, the Charity Commission.
And I'm Harriet Wheeldon, Senior Solicitor at Rollits. I've spent over 5 years helping charity trustees navigate the legal landscape and understand their legal duties, and I'm excited to bring that knowledge to the podcast. Throughout the series, we will be joined by colleagues from Rollits who will share their advice on how strong charity leadership and the clear understanding of the law can make a huge difference to a charity's success.
And we're thrilled to co-host the Hey Charity podcast, where we'll be sitting down with inspiring charity leaders who will share their stories and give you the tools and legal insights to help your charity thrive. So whether you're running a charity or are just passionate about making a difference, join us on this journey to empower charities to succeed. And now, let's go to today's episode.
The legal discussion featured on the podcast is for general guidance only. It provides useful information in a concise form. Action should not be taken without obtaining specific legal advice.
Okay, so fundraising is an important income stream for charities. Today, in part 1 of the Hey Charity podcast, Gerry and Harriet from Rollits will be talking about how the law regulates charitable giving.
Thank you, Sophie. So, fundraising and the law, well, it's a bit of a minefield, isn't it, Gerry?
Certainly is.
In episode 1, we looked at trustee duties in quite a lot of detail, but the main duty, well, the duties always apply in terms of fundraising, but particularly acting within the law when it comes to fundraising is really important. Fundraising can have reputational impacts on lots of charities. Charities should be really careful about reputation, and particularly where other organisations or individuals are raising funds in the name of the charity.
And I think it's very important, obviously, that trustees take a creative and innovative approach to fundraising, because that's what draws the public in. But we have sadly seen some examples, some quite high-profile ones, of where charities' fundraising efforts have not quite gone according to plan, and where trustees haven't really considered their legal duty to preserve the charity's reputation, and that would be particularly the President's Club, and that's a very high profile example of how a charity funds were being raised for charity in a way that wouldn't be considered appropriate. particularly in terms of how the volunteers were used, particularly in terms of how women in particular were used at that event. And the details are out there to look at, but it's a very high profile example of where something went very badly wrong. And what we don't want to do as lawyers is discourage charities from being innovative and creative in their fundraising, because as we'll hear from Andy later on in the podcast, that is absolutely crucial to being successful. But it's just bearing in mind, is this activity beneficial to our charity's reputation? Making sure nothing's been done that's at odds with your charity's purpose, because I suppose just stating an obvious example, particularly when we look at commercial participators and charities, is that you wouldn't get cancer research joining forces with a tobacco firm necessarily in its fundraising. And so I think it's bearing in mind the reputation at all times.
Yeah, reputation to the charity and protecting the charity's reputation. And that leads us quite nicely on to safeguarding. If you have individuals raising funds on behalf of the charity or being involved with the charity, then making sure you have appropriate safeguarding procedures in place. And we've talked about it in episode 1, but delegation to fundraising committees, and making sure that there is a proper reporting procedure in place where you do have a delegated committee, and that there is proper trustee oversight on that committee. How often does the committee have to report to the board as a whole, and how many trustees will sit on the committee?
Certainly, and in terms of committees, about ensuring that they've got clear terms of reference. So what's the fundraising committee being asked to do by the board? Are they being asked to fundraise for a specific purpose or project of the charity? And then, as we'll see later on, what oversight has the board got about any appeal literature or information that the committee is putting out there, not only about the charity, but about what purpose funds are being raised for? Because we'll see it's very important from a legal perspective to get your appeal literature right, because it can solve an almighty headache later on having to go to the regulator, the Charity Commission, to sort it out. So to look at some specifics of fundraising and the law, just to start with looking at the difference between what is technically called primary and non-primary purpose trading. And that sounds like legal gobbledygook, doesn't it? But what does it mean? Charities are restricted by the law in terms of the amount of trading they carry out that has no direct connection to furthering the charity's purposes. And what does that mean? Well, fundraising's an essential activity for charity to get the money to fulfill the purposes, but it surprises a lot of people when I say, as a lawyer, fundraising isn't within the 13 legally recognised charitable aims that we have in the Charities Act 2011. So, for example, if I wanted to set up a charity and its purpose was fundraising, the Charity Commission would say no, that's not a legally recognised charitable purpose, although it's an essential activity to generate the money to enable the charity to fulfil its aims. And why is that? Well, what distinguishes a charity from the commercial and the for-profit sector, the profit distribution sector, is that it's all about the mission. It's not about generating income for the sake of it. It's about what is your mission? Is your mission charitable and within the law? And so charities need to be mindful when they're carrying out fundraising activities about what type of activity it is. And if the charity, for example, is selling merchandise, it might be t-shirts, it might be stationery, it might be mugs or trinkets or something that just purely to generate income and isn't about fulfilling the charity's mission, it would be considered non-primary purpose or non-charitable trading. The law sets a limit on the amount of non-primary purpose or non-charitable trading charities can carry out, and that's based on thresholds and the charity's total annual income from all sources. I'm not going to run through that now because it's incredibly detailed, but what Harriet and I would ask people to do and direct trustees to do is to look at the Charity Commission's resource on its website, Trustees, Trading and Tax, because that explains what these thresholds are and how they might apply to your charity based on its total income. Also, we come across charities that do carry out a lot of that activity. So how can you do it then if you're not allowed to do it through the charity itself? Well, a lot of charities actually set up trading companies or charitable trading subsidiaries that are owned by the charity, but are able to carry out that type of non-primary purpose or non-charitable trading on an unrestricted basis, because they're not charities themselves, so they're not subject to thresholds and charity law on that. And then any income generated is gifted back tax efficiently to the charity. And I think Harriet and I, this is where I'll bring you in, Harriet, because we see a lot of examples where charities have, with really good intentions, set up trading subsidiaries, and they've used company formation agents. They've got the company set up, but that's the easy bit. The legal details in the relationship.
The key part is really getting the relationship right and managing that relationship. So what do we mean by that? Well, who will sit on the board, who will sit on the charities board, and who will sit on the trading subsidiaries board? What about resources? Will any staff be shared? What about things like intellectual property, logos, that sort of thing? Some practical points to consider, really.
I think it's very important that people understand from a charity law perspective, the relationship between a charity and its wholly owned trading company has to be at arm's length. Now that sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? The charity set up this company, it's owned by the charity, it's generating money that ultimately is going to be gifted back to the charity to fulfil the charity's mission. But the law insists that there's that arm's length relationship. Why? Well, the reason is that charities, as I've said before, are set up for the mission. They're set up to drive through their charitable purposes and their mission and make sure that they fulfill those purposes for the benefit of the public. If the trustees start thinking too much about commercial trading activity, what will make us money, what can we do next, that can put the charity at risk, not only of mission drift, where they spend so much time in charity meetings talking about commercial trading and how can we bring in money rather than the charity's mission, but also it can put the charity's assets and resources at risk. And one of the key duties of the trustee is to manage the charity's resources and assets responsibly. And if charity funds are put at risk from speculative commercial trading activity and it all goes wrong, well, that could be the charity going under. That could be the charity no longer being able to fulfill its purposes. So what the law says is, because you're a charity, you're different from the commercial sector, you're different from profit distributing businesses. So you're restricted as to the amount of commercial trading you can carry out, do it through a subsidiary. But if you have a subsidiary, the relationship has to be arm's length. Any funds that the charity provides to the subsidiary have to be provided on an arm's length basis. So that means things like loan, doesn't it, Harriet, and having arm's length loan agreements in place.
Yeah, ensuring that the relationship remains arm's length, there's proper controls in place. It might mean that the charity has to adopt certain policies on what the relationship will look like, maybe even enter into some more formal agreements, so relationship agreements, resource sharing agreements, to really manage that relationship, particularly where it could be quite detailed. Sometimes they can get very complex.
The arrangements can get very complex, and that's why we'd always advise charities getting into the realm of trading subsidiaries to seek advice when they're doing it, because it's easy to put these things in place from the outset rather than having to correct them later when they've gone wrong, because HM Revenue and Customs can challenge charities on these arrangements if they're not put in place on an arm's length basis, and in extreme cases claw back some of the charity's tax reliefs if charity funds have been used to subsidise commercial trading subsidiaries on a non-arm's length basis. And it's also the reason why Harriet alluded at the beginning of this section to the boards not being a complete overlap. So having some independent directors on the board of the trading company, but also it's a different skill set as well, isn't it?
Yeah, so with charities, you've obviously got your charitable mission that you want to achieve. With trading companies, profit-making companies, albeit distributing the surplus to the charity, their purpose is trading to make a profit. That's the whole purpose behind it. So it requires a different set of skills.
So you need to think very early doors if you're setting up a trading company. Who is best placed to sit on our board of our trading company? And it might be that you've got trustees who are captains of industry or from a business background who would be really good candidates to sit on that board. That can happen as long as you don't have a complete subset from the board and you've got some independent people as well. Think about the skills and think about what you need on each board. And finally, on this subject, we have come across some cases where trading companies have gone rogue, and this is where it's important to get the balance right. And going back to reputation and ensuring that the activity that any trading company carries out is not only within the law, but it helps promote your charity as well, because the public won't see two legal entities. They won't see two separate companies. They'll see the trading company and the charity often as one and the same. So anything the trading company does and the board of the trading subsidiary do could actually impact on the charity itself and its reputation. I can't emphasise this enough, really, because without that good reputation, charities can't successfully fundraise. And we've seen, obviously, with the sad example of the President's Club, how that's when things can go very badly wrong. So it's important that boards have proper oversight of their trading companies as well. And ultimately, the trading company exists for the charity to generate funds for the charity. So any business plan that the trading company has needs to be approved by and run past the charity's board. And it's important to have that reporting and accountability in place. And then to move on from that and to look at professional fundraising. That's a whole legal sphere for charities, and a lot of charities, well, some of the biggest national charities will be in a very privileged position to be able to engage the services of professional fundraisers. The point to bear in mind here is that if you are, as a charity, looking at engaging a professional fundraiser, making sure that you put in place a professional fundraising agreement. And there's a piece of charity legislation that governs exactly what that agreement has to cover and what it must look like. And so again, we would refer trustees to the Charity Commission's guidance on the use of professional fundraisers, and also the guidance of umbrella bodies, for example, and the fundraising regulator as well.
Another technique that many charities use for fundraising is getting involved with commercial organisations, profit organisations, to help fundraise. So these are known as commercial participators. In terms of commercial participation, we see real life examples every day. You can go to the shops and see examples on all types of products, and they will say that the manufacturer or producer will donate an amount to a charity and identify that charity with its registered charity number as a result of the promotion. And that's one example. And if you look around the shops, you will see that, but it's very important to get that statement right. So it's where a commercial organisation, so a profit-making organisation, creates a relationship with a charity with the purpose of raising funds for that charity. And the law gets quite technical in this area, but it's really important that the legal rules are followed, because the consequences of entering into these agreements and not getting the wording exactly right could be detrimental to the charity. It can even, in some circumstances, lead to what is known as a serious incident. So the Charity Commission has serious incident reporting examples, which can be found online. And an example of a reportable incident would be where the charity hasn't complied with the law on requirements for solicitation statements or professional fundraising agreements. So it just reiterates what Gerry was saying about getting the literature right from the start, and you can save yourself a real headache later on if you get it right.
Absolutely. So if you're using a professional fundraiser, make sure you've got the proper professional fundraising agreement in place. And if you are in the position of having a commercial participator, a company that you work with to collaborate on fundraising, that you have a commercial participators agreement and you make sure that complies with the law and that the statements you use are correct. This brings us on to appeals literature. And what do we mean by that? Well, this is really the information that your charity puts out in the public domain when it's embarking on a fundraising campaign. And as lawyers, we would advise all charities to make sure you get that right at the very beginning, because sometimes what trustees don't always think through, if they've not done this before, is what happens to all that money we have raised if we don't raise enough and we can't go ahead with the project. What happens if the opposite occurs and we raise so much, we're so successful, we've got too much, we've got a surplus? What happens if the original purpose that we're raising the funds for can no longer go ahead, whether we didn't get planning permission for a particular capital project, or as a board we've decided, well, actually, with the benefit of hindsight, we wouldn't have pursued that now. Things change, and hindsight's an absolutely wonderful thing. But I think in terms of the appeals literature, if you've not been very clear in that appeals literature to your donors, to the public, when you're going out raising money, what will happen if too much money is raised, if not enough is raised, or if you raise too much, then you get into the realms of having to look at going to the Charity Commission or following set legal procedures about how you can then apply that money. If, for example, you're not able to contact those original donors to get their permission to use the money for another purpose, and if cash has just been thrown into a collecting bucket, that's not always going to be possible. Or if, for example, it was a very long time ago and the money's still sitting there, you might not actually be able to contact all those original donors.
Exactly. So whichever type of fundraising method you adopt, whether it's your own raising funds by the charity raising funds itself, through fundraising appeals, or if you're going to partner with another organisation, then it's really important that it's well planned, prepared, getting the wording right. If you're working with other organisations, doing your due diligence on the organisation, again, perhaps from a safeguarding point of view, but from a reputational point of view, does the organisation's ethos match with the charities? Keeping those things in mind would help with fundraising.
Definitely. And I think a final one from me would be making sure that your trustees, anyone who sits on a fundraising committee, and your volunteers have the benefit of training around exactly what are they being asked to do on the charity's behalf, what message are they putting out about your charity, are they equipped to go out there and represent your charity to the public? Because we've all been, I think, in situations over the years, have been on the high street and being approached by people on the street raising funds for charity, and it can feel quite awkward and quite uncomfortable in some cases. And there were cases, I think, where perhaps charities hadn't done their due diligence on the people raising funds on their behalf, when I think that the phrase chugger was used, which isn't a very nice phrase, but I think it was where they were becoming quite aggressive with people. And I've had this where they shout after you in the street and they try and single you out or pick out something you're wearing to get your attention, and it's not very nice, and it does make you feel a bit cross about that charity, which is perhaps unfair. But
I guess you can understand it, because everyone wants to raise, you want to be the person that raises the most funds, but yeah, keeping an eye on things like that is quite important.
Definitely. So having that training and ability to be able to do things in an appropriate manner is really, really important, because it goes back to preserving your charity's reputation. And then I think that the safeguarding point that Harriet made around making sure, again, that appropriate safeguarding procedures are put in place if you're doing a particular type of event. And again, and this is to go on to health and safety, but a charity challenge event, something that may involve doing something physical for charity, just making sure that you've thought about how that will take place safely, which it's a whistle stop, but hopefully has provided trustees with some useful guidance.
So So today on the Hey Charity podcast, we are delighted to be joined by Andy Haynes. Now, Andy Haynes is the current CEO of Age UK, Hull and East Yorkshire, and today's topic is all things fundraising. Now, Andy has a tremendous journey in the charity sector, and when we were chatting before this episode about what that journey looked like, Andy shared some amazing stories about his journey, which Andy all started as a 17-year-old volunteering on Christmas Day. Is that right?
Yes, that is. I was doing my A-levels, and I think my parents and school were keen for me to progress into a career in international business and logistics. However, my A-level results, I think, were starting to indicate that wasn't going to happen. And we had a presentation on probably in sort of about this time of year. I remember in 1990 from a charity, they were talking about people who'd be spending Christmas alone, looking for some volunteers to come and help serve lunch on Christmas Day. And I put my hand up, and me and two friends went and did that, and that just took me on a complete journey into the whole charity sector.
Fantastic. So as a 17-year-old young man volunteering on Christmas Day, do you ever take yourself back to that experience and how you felt? Because that triggered, didn't it, in you and ignited something in you that really takes you to where we are today in your role with Age UK.
Yes, and I distinctly remember, and back then I had more hair than I've got now and was into heavy metal, wearing all the stuff and paraphernalia that goes with it, but I was still mad keen on doing that on that Christmas Day. That connected me with the charity, and I remember there was a guy there called Nick who equally was into heavy metal, and he was running the charity. We got on really well, and then he was saying, what are you going to do after A-levels? And I was thinking, some form of university if I got enough grades, let's be honest. But then during the summer, I raised enough money between the Christmas and the June so I could fund myself living away from home for the first time, which was a major attraction, let's be honest, but living away from home, spending 4 months of the summer working in deprived estates, running play schemes for disabled children, and that was just thought, well, this is what I want to do. How can I then turn that into a career? And really that's where I've gone on from there, really, is I found that, and I've volunteered all the way through. I still volunteer now, and that's had big life-changing effects as well. And I do reflect back and actually go, well, I just thoroughly enjoy seeing people do what they're good at and enjoy that, and that's really what I do now as well.
Brilliant. And that takes me back to, we recently spoke with Trish Dolby, who is an experienced chair, and she talked about having a passion for helping others, but she had a phrase that she used that really resonated with me, and it was called empathy with action. So it's one thing to have that desire and that passion and that empathy to help others, but it's around learning the skills and development to be able to ensure that you can action what's required. So talk to us a little bit about how you went from a 17-year-old boy volunteering on Christmas Day, supporting people to have a fantastic festive period, to where you are now, because that empathy with action is something I think runs through your story.
Yeah, well, then, as I was saying, picking the story back up in sort of 1991 now, because that's where I spent that summer. I got enough grades to A-levels to go to university, and that university course was very much about working in the charity sector and a degree doing that sort of thing. And there were lots of practical work experiences within that, everything from planting trees to I remember there's a young man called Wycan, severely disabled but managing his own care completely independent in the community. So I did sort of stuff like that. I did a lot of work in HIV and AIDS counselling as well. Did my dissertation within that on the differences between what the health sector provide and what the charity sector provide, and I could just see that actually the health sector was a bit more process driven, whereas the charity sector just filled in everything else around it all, and I thought that's where I want to be. Went on sort of doing some work in that, working with street outreach, drug users, crawling through squats and doing needle exchanges and things like that with people. But what I started to see is that you talk about that empathy in action, and that's a wonderful phrase, is I could see it happening around me, and I suppose I was doing it as well, but I could see that there were people I was working alongside, colleagues, who were just so much more natural than I was at just building that rapport up with people in need, the drunk, the person who's off their head on whatever, and those sorts of things. And I could do it and was all right, but they just seemed natural. And then my manager at the time, they left, and because I'd been there longer than anyone else, they said, "Oh, would you just cover?" And I very quickly found that I got an immense amount of enjoyment and satisfaction from creating the conditions that meant that the people who were brilliant at the face-to-face work could just crack on with that and not worry about where the money was coming from, or health and safety, or the bureaucracy that needs to happen at times. And I actually thought, well, I'm quite good at that, but I could still see the impact it was having on the ground, and that sort of scratched that itch, and off I went, really.
Brilliant. And we spoke about that last time, didn't we, Harriet, around understanding what your strengths are and building a dynamic team, and I think that's really important. And that leads me really nicely to talk about the topic of fundraising, which is a particular skill set of yours. So really, really keen to understand from you, what are the most effective strategies you've seen through your experience of engaging with donors, and more importantly, keeping them connected to the charity's core mission?
Personally, I like the ones that have a bit of fun and take a bit of risk. So, like, for example, we buy our toilet paper that comes with a wrapper on, says, who gives a crap? And it doesn't matter who you are, we're all human beings, we all need to use the loo. And the toilet papers can wrap like that. But then equally, how many toilets have I been in over the years where there's a little framed picture on the wall of a toilet that someone's sponsoring, along with the grid reference underneath? I've been in friends' houses and it's either above the loo or on the back door. I've been in pubs and restaurants and it's there, and the toilet paper having a lap. Or there's like oddballs, when you buy a pack of, and it started off with it just being gents, and you could buy a pack of very colourful boxes, and on the back is a little description of how to check yourself for testicular cancer, and money that's raised through the sale of those goes with that. Or there was one around breast cancer, and it was called Copper Feel, to encourage both men and women to check each other, and sort of things like that. And you sort of think, yeah, that really engages people. And certainly one I've known for loads of years is, I can't remember the name of the charity, and I would mention it if I could, but it was about sponsoring a child in a developing country, and then the child would write to you. And I know a number of people who, usually when they've retired, have then travelled the world, and they've gone out to maybe deprived areas of certainly the African subcontinent or South America, and met the child that they might have sponsored for 20 years, and who wrote to them regularly. And those sort of fun stuff, but then that real connection that keeps people connected to a charity's mission, I think it can be really powerful.
Brilliant. That's a great answer, Andy, and as well how those campaigns really resonate with people in everyday communities as well. So I think that's really, really powerful. I know my colleague Harriet's really keen to talk to you about some challenges and successes that you faced as well. So Harriet, over to you.
Thank you, Andy. That's really interesting to hear about. Firstly, your experience and how you've become more involved in fundraising, particularly for this episode. I really like your approach to fundraising in terms of finding fundraising techniques which are engaging and fun with connection to the charity. I think that's really important. For all charities, fundraising can be a real challenge. Are you able to share any memorable fundraising challenges that you've faced, or equally important, any success stories, and how these have impacted on the charity's overall mission?
Yeah, I think thinking about that, I think there's two that come to mind, and I'll mention the more recent one in a minute. So I used to work in the sight loss sector and work with local sight loss charities, and I ran a few, and we would need to raise money to support local people who were living with sight loss. But it's a little known fact that only 7% of people who are registered blind can't see a thing. People have got different levels of light perception through to all sorts of distortions of vision due to the eye conditions. And one of the challenges we had is that you'd often see guide dogs with a nice fluffy puppy in the middle of your town raising money. Well, who doesn't want to give to a fluffy dog? But that money wouldn't come to the local organisation. So one of the things we did is quite a lot of sight loss charities will have what they call sim specs. And these are like, if you remember at school, wearing the science goggles and things. And what we'd do is you'd put effects onto the glasses that would then recreate the effect of the eye condition. And we would challenge people, and we did it with local companies and things like that, work for a day, and under one condition you can't remove that sim specs. So and sight was a real, very obvious thing, is that we take it for granted, and then when it goes, then you can see what people are learning to live and deal with. So that was a really good one that sort of connected people with it. And it could be a bit of fun because people were bumping into stuff and tripping over and things like that. But equally as well, it created a bit of an activity and a bit of a mission. And I think the more recent one, very familiar to us in Hull, is Jean Bishop and the Bee Lady with Age UK Hull and East Yorkshire. She raised well over £100,000 for us, dressing up as an old lady in a bee costume, rattling a tin, raising money. And who wouldn't engage with that? And that creates a real connection, and it's a legacy that we're looking and hoping to also carry on as well as part of the organisation.
That, I think those examples are really interesting, and I think the approach is engaging with people so they understand the charity's mission, and getting people involved to really connect with the charity, but with the view to fundraise. I think that's really important. I know that leads us on nicely to Gerry's next question around support for smaller charities. Over to you, Gerry.
Thank you. I think it can be quite daunting if you're a smaller charity and you're volunteer-led and you don't have employees or paid staff, because the national charities, the large charities, will have fundraising teams of paid members of staff who can help coordinate and launch a fundraising campaign. And in particular, they'll have the resources to pay professional fundraisers as well. Andy, you've mentioned Jean Bishop, the Bee Lady, being very successful for your organisation, Age UK Hull and East Yorkshire, to raise the profile of and funds that come into your local branch of that charity. And you also mentioned the example of the guide dog in the city centre, raising awareness of fundraising for a charity, but where funds might not be diverted locally or ring-fenced for local causes. How do you think the smaller charities, particularly those that are volunteer-led, can compete in what's quite a challenging environment and fun for fundraising?
Gosh, that's a difficult question, and I think it's difficult for smaller charities. Certainly, I'm always hesitant to use personal examples because I'm not always right. But certainly as well, when I've seen it work effectively, or more effectively, is people give to people. And when I was quite younger in my charity sector career, I was trying to get alongside the local council, and there was a local councillor, Chris Toe, I remember him fondly, and he also ran a range of business networking breakfasts, and he said, come along. So of course I went, because I was trying to get on his good books, and it's full of businesses, as you'd expect. We get your little minute to stand up, but one of the first things I did is I didn't ask for money, but I stood up and said what we did as a small charity. And then as people got to know me, first of all they thought he's safe because he's not immediately asking for cash. So I'd then start, when we had an event coming up, I'd say to people, have you got anything we could borrow? Have you got anything we could use? Because we could then use that to get money from others to then help what we do. And then we needed some trustees. So I said a couple of the business networking meetings, could you help by giving your time, by advising us as a trustee? And then you start building up a network with a graphic designer who's there, or someone who does social media, and actually sort of say, would you be able to help us with a bit of this or a bit of that? And then as things start to progress, we then had got to know a company, and we asked them if they would sponsor on our behalf the local football team, just to buy their shirts, but would you put our name alongside it? Which is what they did. And of course, you notice there, I still haven't had any money yet. But with the local football team, we sort of said, the company said, we'll sponsor your shirts, and it will have our logo on and the charity that one of the directors is. And we're only talking, when I say directors, we're talking an owner-run local building firm is on the shirt as well. On one condition: when you do your summer barbecues and run car boot sales on the football ground, give the money to the local charity. So it wasn't an immediate ask for funds, but we built the relationships. And often what we found, certainly as a smaller charity, is if you're asking people to maybe pay for your insurance cover for something, they can do that. Or asking for them to, could you buy us an awning or buy us a gazebo so we can then do this? That is often easier for them to do, because they'll just hide it. Wouldn't hide it as in illegally, but it's just an expense that they can put into their businesses. And then on that, you start to then build a relationship up and raise some funds.
I think that's a really good way of approaching it, Andy, because you talk about building those relationships. And I think that's where the smaller charities and the local charities have that advantage, actually, and they should use that to their best potential. And particularly I think fundraising can be very money focused, as you've said, but actually if you're a smaller charity, it's about generating awareness of what you do and why, because people can give in different ways. People can give their time and their expertise and their resource to charity that for a smaller charity can be just as effective as the money, because if you build those relationships and build up that network, you can build yourself an army of volunteers who can perhaps help your charity and help it fulfill its mission in different ways. And we talked before the podcast, actually, Andy, didn't we, around raising awareness in the literature, the fundraising literature that you put out there, because Harriet and I touched on this in our legal discussion, around if you want to leave a legacy or a gift, either through your will, and it's going to be through to a local charity, to make that very clear when you're writing that, because actually there can be a confusion in some cases between the local branch of a charity and the national charity.
Yes, very much so. So, I mean, I'll give you two examples. Obviously, I work for Age UK. Now, in the region, no one says Age UK Hull and East Yorkshire. It's just Age UK. Well, if your mum sadly passed away and decided she wanted to leave some money to Age UK and put that in the will, then we might not get it for the people of Hull and East Yorkshire. It would go to Age UK nationally, and we do have some benefits from being part of that network, but we wouldn't see the money. So the simplest and easiest thing is, if you do want to put something in your will, you put the charity's name and, importantly, the registered number for that charity.
Absolutely.
And all charities on their websites will have, usually at the bottom on the front page, their charity number, and that's all you need to do. And another way, especially if you're a smaller charity or a regionally focused charity, so like ourselves, when I worked in the sight loss sector, one of the things that we did a fundraising campaign, and we didn't have fundraisers, it was just the staff that were out there doing the work every day, is we connected with the caring network around the individual. And we did it really for two reasons. One, just quite simply, if you notice if Dad's eye condition's worsening, give us a ring. That was it. Or you're worried about what's happening with Dad, give us a ring. But that equally as well, we sowed the seed in that actually it's Sight Support Bedfordshire that's providing the support to your dad. So then when sadly something might happen and people want to give to an organisation that maybe helped Dad for the last 20 years of his life whilst his sight was deteriorating, it was Sandra and the team at Sight Concern Bedfordshire that did it, not guide dogs or the other national sight loss charities. So it creates that local link and local connection.
That's really helpful, thank you. And I think as well, when we've talked a lot in this podcast, and it builds on the themes that Trish was talking about, empathy in action, I really liked your example of the sight loss charity in the glasses, because it gives people the chance to experience what that's like. And I think it can be difficult if a charity hasn't impacted you personally, but it may in the future, or it may impact someone you know. And if you've got to experience how that feels, it creates that empathy that can then drive action. So I thought that was a really interesting example, and a way in which smaller charities can be innovative in how they approach their fundraising, in creating that empathy and that basis for support. Thank you.
People give to people. I really like that, and I think relationships has been a key theme that's been embedded through this conversation today. And Gerry, you alluded to that it's not always about the money, so that's not necessarily a transactional relationship that's important, it's the relationship with the people. We hope that there'll be many individuals within charities that are maybe dedicated fundraising officers, Andy, or doing fundraising alongside many other roles, as we know many volunteers do in our regions. If there is a fundraiser out there that is maybe struggling to connect, or is maybe at the start of their journey, thinking about that people give to people ethos, what 3 pieces of advice can you give today based on your experience that will hopefully kickstart their enthusiasm?
Gosh, I think the first thing I'd say is don't ask for money straight away. You need to build a relationship and a rapport. So rather than saying, oh, we need £1,000 for this, is try not to ask for money straight away, even though all your instincts may well be saying, and the bank balance and the problem the charity's going through needs money. Don't ask for money straight away. Build up that rapport to at least establish whether the person's bothered or interested, because some people love giving to animal charities, others can't. Some people are a bit fatigued by cancer charities, but they'd love to help maybe your organisation working with young people. So try and find, when you're building a rapport, what is it that person's bothered about, and be asking for their advice and their opinion to build up that rapport, because people love sharing their advice and sharing their opinion. And then the next point almost sounds like it's completely contradicting the first point, is when the time's right to ask and be clear. Don't beat about the bush and what we're trying to do and stuff like that. Especially if you're engaging with, supporters or business people. It is, yeah, we like you, we're seeing you again, we've built up that rapport. Okay, we'll ask and actually say we're trying to raise £1,000 to do this, and say to them, would you be prepared to help with that? And when you're saying help with that, be a little creative and think, okay, how could we help? Well, let me give you one example we've done at the moment. We've got some videos that we're going to be using at our ball in a couple of weeks' time, and they'll be part of our fundraising moving forward. They cost £6,000 to produce. We didn't pay a penny, but the organisation said, we could actually do this. So sometimes, yes, ask for help. Sometimes it's asking for money. Sometimes it's asking for things that can sort of benefit from it. And the third bit is just being very clear that's then going to happen as a result. And actually, say, so don't rush in and ask for money, but then when you've built up the rapport, don't be afraid to say, we want £1,000 for this, and then explain exactly what that's going to do. So we were saying on that video one, we want to create some 90-second videos, because that's all the attention span of people have on Twitter, TikTok, stuff like that. 90 seconds. They want to look professional and good. How could you help us? I'll tell you what, we'll film them for you. But what they're then, because they'll be timeless, will last us probably a good couple of years.
Amazing, Andy. So, number 1, don't ask for money straight away. Build up that rapport, relationships, people. Secondly, when the time is right, be clear on your ask. And thirdly, it's about impact, isn't it? And building that relationship and maintaining and retaining that relationship. Amazing pieces of advice for fundraisers and volunteers out there. I wish we could speak to you all day, Andy. I really do, because I feel you've got so many more exciting things to share with us. But before we do finish, you mentioned at the beginning of the episode that you still volunteer.
Yes.
What does that look like for you now?
Oh gosh, well, what am I doing at the moment? Couple of things really. So I'm currently effectively chair of trustees for an accommodation provider in Hull that provides what we call a place of welcome to those in need. We're trying to expand it so that we can be providing space for those people who've just been granted leave to remain in the UK, because there's a massive shortage of that supported accommodation. So I'm chair of trustees there, which almost feels like a day job at times because it's dealing with all the stuff of running a small charity. And I'm also a school governor, so I get involved doing all that sort of stuff, and I must admit I seem to spend quite a bit of time on dealing with people exclusions and things like that, using the HR skills and experience I've got. So that's sort of where I am at the moment, but it comes right back from being that 17-year-old when I did that at Christmas, and volunteering has changed my life because it took me into a career in an industry that I wouldn't have gone towards, and then literally I was assistant manager for a day centre for the homeless, and a young lady came to volunteer for 2 weeks, that was all, and at the end of the first week of volunteering she proposed to me, and that's 22 plus years later of happy marriage, and there we go. So volunteering can change your life, and don't be shy, have a go. It's great things to put on your CV. It proves you can do stuff, and it changed my life, and happily married, and there we go.
Amazing. I'm really pleased you've mentioned the impact that it has on you as well, because having empathy kickstarts that passion for a lot of people to volunteer. But actually, I know from my own experience as well, I volunteer within my community. I get a great sense of community, self-worth, self-esteem from volunteering as well. So it's about helping others, but actually it contributes to our overall well-being as well. So I think that's a lovely way to end. Volunteering has changed your life, and I'm sure it's changed thousands of people across our region. Andy, you've been a fantastic guest. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks very much.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of the Hey Charity Podcast. We hope you found today's discussion as inspiring and insightful as we did. And remember, whether you're a charity leader, trustee or passionate supporter, there's always more to learn about how we can make a greater impact together. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review and share it with your network. Your support helps us continue to bring valuable insights to the charitable community.
And if you have any questions, suggestions or ideas of future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. All contact details are in the episode description.
Until next time, keep making a difference, and thank you for listening.
The legal discussion featured on the podcast is for general guidance only. It provides useful information in a concise form. Action should not be taken without obtaining specific legal advice.